friends. Welcome back to Doorway to Discovery, the WPL podcast. As usual, my name is Erin and my pronouns are she, her. And today we are talking a little bit about cataloging, which is a large library term for how we organize the books. So hopefully you guys find this interesting. And I'm going to pass it along to our guest speaker to introduce herself. This is Melissa Adler. Melissa, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me to talk to you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I love talking about the organization of information and knowledge with people who actually, are working with it and doing it and engaging with it all the time. So I am on the faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western University. I mostly teach library science. So I teach research methods, and I'm teaching information organization right now. Sometimes I teach in the undergrad program, which is the media studies program. I'm just totally obsessed with classification and knowledge organization. So happy to talk more. Looking forward to this.
Thank you so much. Ashlyn, she, they, and I invited Melissa because I also go to Western, and I was so lucky to have her as my professor for research methods last term. And I'm really excited to kind of pick your brain about your story of your research, but I will let everyone else introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Shelby. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently working on my MLIS at U of T. And I'm super excited to meet you, Melissa, because I stumbled upon your research last semester during one of my classes with Jenna Hartel. And your research pops up so often this semester, and you're a little bit of a celebrity to me. So I'm super excited because I love all your work. So I can't wait to talk to you about it because I'm obsessing a little bit.
All right, and contagious. It's a thing.
It is.
Sorry.
Hi everyone, I'm Kylie. My pronouns are she, her, and I work at the Roslyn branch, organizing a lot, putting away a lot of books. So excited to learn some more about other ways of organizing and classifying library materials.
Awesome.
Amazing. Okay, so the first thing we kind of wanted to ask you about was, how would you explain classification to a non-library person?
Well, if we're talking, are we specifically talking about the classification of books?
Yeah, let's say that.
Let's say that, just to keep it contained.
Yeah.
Let's say you are a patron and you are looking for a book and you've heard of the Dewey Decimal Classification, which I'm assuming you are organized by.
Yeah.
They want to know what that means, right? Like, this is something we grew up with. Everybody sort of learns the basics of the Dewey Decimal Classification when they're a kid, in public school and then public libraries and on. And I think we kind of take it for granted. It doesn't really mean much. It's just sort of directional. So what I would say, if somebody wanted to know more about that, what that is that the Dewey Decimal Classification was created by Melville Dewey a long time ago, like about 150 years ago. And basically he ordered the library according to subjects, and he placed everything into 10 major groupings according to what we might call disciplines, and then organized them with the intention of people being able to find things that are related to other things, right? Other books.
No, that's awesome. So I guess like another question for you, with us being a public library and with you working in an academic setting and a lot of your research being on like the Library of Congress, how do you kind of like envision the differences between those classification systems?
Yeah, so the public library setting is really meant for a broad public meaning like all the different people that might go to a library, right? So the difference between the public library and the academic library is that academic libraries are really meant to serve scholars, right? Researchers, students, faculty, people who are doing that kind of academic research. And so it's a much more sort of refined system in the academic context. much more so-called disciplined, organized around the academic disciplines, and then divided quite specifically within those disciplines, so that researchers can get to the most relevant materials that are related to their topic. That's the idea anyway. In practice, it may or may not always work that way, but that's the idea.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a lot of good points about like it being a specific audience that these are tailored to. And this is a discussion like we've had a couple times on here. So we were talking recently kind of what would a library look like. We kind of had a side tangent, which we're going to make into an episode about like genreifying the shelves and things like that. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something like that, which is obviously like totally different from like using like Dewey. Well, I mean, like, of course, Dewey isn't used to classify fiction, but I don't know, like we kind of had this discussion, and Erin, you had a lot of really like interesting takes.
Oh, thanks.
No, they were great. Yeah.
You're gonna hear them. So what are you thinking about?
Oh, geez. Well, by small tangent actually means like a 15-minute rant.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to remember. I think one of the things personally, anyway, I can't speak for other people, but I know when I walk into public libraries, because I think they're probably the most used with the largest members of the population, that genreifying things can get kind of frustrating. In some ways, I've noticed things are like misgenred. Like I would find like a fantasy book in like the horror section. And it's just, sometimes I personally think it's a little bit too open to interpretation. Where, and other things, like I know a lot of us, there's one book in particular that I think 3 of us read, that won an award for like, yeah, Shelby's laughing because we hate this. It won an award for like best romance, but we all read it and we were like, this isn't a romance novel, like it's a fantasy novel. So it just feels like other things can get left behind, or, you know, like slip through the cracks when you try to genreify things like too much. And I'll leave it at that because I could go on for an hour.
But I think that's I think where my obsession comes in. So if I may, I think we might as well just sort of go there, because I think that's always the trick with classification. It's always designed by humans, right? It's always designed by people. So what somebody imagines something is about, or what genre it fits into, or who its reader will be, is always so various, right? So I mean, I think even with the Library of Congress, or the Dewey context, if you gave a book to 5 different catalogers, they probably all have different ideas about, especially if it's fiction, about what that work is about and where it belongs and what it's related to. And that speaks to, you know, we all have our own identifications with materials. And something like chemistry might be a little bit easier to say, okay, this is definitely about this. But, and that's sort of partly why library classifications are tricky, because the things that are, that tend to be in fiction or the humanities, or things that are open to interpretation, are always going to be open to all kinds of different possibilities that way. And I think that's the other thing I meant to say about the Library of Congress too, because initially the Library of Congress was entirely meant to serve the US Congress. So I find it so interesting that the Library of Congress really sets the standards by which many libraries around the world organize their materials, because we haven't even talked about subject headings. And perhaps perhaps your listeners are curious to know what those are as well. But those are just, you know, those are the terms that are the terms we search by in the catalog. So it's not necessarily about location, it's the search terms, and those are authorized quite literally. Those are what they're called, the authority headings, authorized by the Library of Congress. And Canada has its own headings as well, but they end up sort of being merged with Library of Congress effectively. So yeah, you have these large government bodies sort of authorizing the terms by which we find materials in the catalog, and they are very specific and very often strange for
Yeah.
some people to encounter, but I think it's important to differentiate because those are two different types of classification and they're both at work. In the Library of Congress, subject headings are very widespread. Like they are used in catalogs all over the world, sometimes in translation and sometimes in English. And so you find that there's some real interesting, Americanization of knowledge and information around the world through these standards. And then the Library of Congress itself, the shelf classification is used in a lot of research libraries around the world too, and then Dewey too. So it's really interesting that I think that sort of lens is projected into libraries all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a good point.
Do you think you go into more description? I know you deal a lot with the subject headings in the LLC, and recently, this is something that Ashlyn and I both talk a lot about, is your work with queer lit against some of the ways that they were classified. I know I recently was learning about, I think it was Berkeley, they had a bunch of students that were undocumented, and they kind of formed a group because they had recently been working in the library system and were learning how to catalog, and they came across the term illegal alien, and so that was the term that was searched up. If you wanted to find anything on people who are undocumented, it was under illegal alien, therefore completely blocking off access to anybody who was looking up the term undocumented instead of the way that they had classified it. So I wonder if maybe you can go into that, because I'm super excited to hear what you have to say about what happened with the Library of Congress and their terms they have used.
Yeah, so that's a really great example. And actually, I think it's Dartmouth that is the university that this happened at. And it was a really interesting problem. And there is a documentary, and I think it's accessible. I think it's open access indefinitely. It's called Change the Subject. So if you want to know about that, it's really good and really useful. But in terms of thinking about that sort of, there's a way in which there's sort of like it's a cultural imperialism kind of question, right? The way that the Library of Congress is exported around the world. And that's one of the ways that I look at it. But yeah, you're right. So there was this illegal aliens was the heading. And it was students that brought this up and worked with librarians because the Library of Congress does have a program called the Subject Authority Cooperative. And you can, SACO is what they call it. And you can, if you're a member library, if you're a member of this cooperative, you can propose new headings or you can propose changes to existing headings, and you submit, supporting documentation and so on, and make a case for why this heading is needed. And so the Library of Congress does solicit these kinds of requests from librarians, experts in the fields and so on. And then they put it to a committee and then they decide what to do with that, whether they should authorize it or not. And in this case, it came down to a question of the fact that the Library of Congress is indeed an American federal government institution, and Congress actually did get involved, and they found out that this was happening, and Republicans actually tried to put forth a bill to sort of outlaw the possibility of this changing. And ultimately, the Librarians of Congress, as I understand it, had to stay with the heading as it, I believe it still is illegal aliens, because it's got to adhere to formal US government language. There's this interesting, it really shows that the Library of Congress is indeed the Library of Congress, that it's connected to the US government. And so before this even happened, I happened to be at a conference in Denmark, and I knew about this heading. I already knew it was problematic aside from this. And I asked my Danish colleagues what they thought of this heading, because it's in their catalog. And they were just kind of dumbfounded. They didn't know what this term meant, right? It didn't have any relevance. And they were just like, we would never, ever use that terminology. But yet that is the terminology that's in their catalog, because they use this US system. So it's interesting in so many different ways. So I would say, yeah, if you're interested, definitely watch Change the Subject. That's the documentary. And you'll get more of the sort of ins and outs of the details of how that all took place. And then, yeah, for me, I find that connection with the US government so interesting and fraught.
Definitely, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, I feel like I kind of like am obsessed with like the notion of like neutrality in the library. I mean, like it just doesn't really exist. So I think it's really, really wild that like that the authority is obviously so subjective. And I didn't really realize how widespread it was that like your Danish colleagues, you know, like in the, I guess in the Netherlands, like that it would affect them. That's just like, I don't know, that's crazy to me.
And for it to be a term that they don't understand either. So not only is it something that it shouldn't be used, but when they actually went to go look at it, they're like, we don't even know what that term means. So for somebody to then try and look up material that is under that heading, it wouldn't have been found at all, correct? So that's the thing to me that is so insane about classification, is the fact that just that one tiny misstep can erase so much information from people being able to access it. And I couldn't imagine. I didn't know that they actually didn't end up changing it. We watched part of the documentary in my class, and I was amazed, first of all, that it was even in the catalog. But then it reminds me, my grandparents live in the States, and they are considered legal aliens. And if the terminology in all of the government's documents is that way, then it makes sense that they wouldn't be allowed to change it without then changing all of the documents from illegal aliens to undocumented. But I think because it's American, like that's such a bigger issue, is that, I mean, all of our media comes from America, a good chunk of it, right? And now even our data around classification of our materials is also being controlled by an American government.
I mean, it really speaks to sort of these global standards and globalization and how that works. And one of the reasons that I find library classification so fascinating is that we can actually see it, right? So we have access to all these classifications. They're public libraries. The Library of Congress is a public institution. So I love that. And it allows us to see what's happening. And there is a certain degree of transparency there that I think is really good. We can interrogate it. And that's in sharp contrast to things like algorithms, right? So many people are talking about the ways that algorithms have very similar problems. And a lot of those problems sort of reside at the level of classification, but we can't see how things are ordered in those, right? They're all hidden in a black box kind of situation. So partly because they're proprietary, partly because of the great technical nature of these things, it's really the opposite of transparent. But we can kind of see some of those, the inner workings of libraries and library classifications. And we can actually, what I like about them is I love to use library classifications as historical documents. We can really learn a lot about ourselves as we relate to these ideas and these categories, and how these categories sort of literally inform culture. So I think there's a lot to be said for the usefulness of these in terms of being historical tools and entries into some of these really complicated questions about how we categorize people and how governments see people differently than people might see themselves, right? So, and this is really interesting when we come to, and fraught when we come to Indigenous classifications and so on. So sort of what needs to be done when we think about decolonizing or indigenizing the catalog. There's so many interesting and good projects that are challenging these government ideas about who people are and what communities are and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I got lucky and I got into the course at Western. It's like the pilot course of Indigenizing and Decolonizing LIS. And it's been amazing because, oh, and listeners, LIS is just Library and Information Science. But so like in the course, we've actually spent a lot of time talking about like Indigenizing the catalog. And we've had so many guests come on, and it's really cool. They have a bunch of living documents, but one of the things we looked at was kind of a spreadsheet they had of like proposed, I guess, like subject headings, like that would be appropriate for different Indigenous communities. And it has like the appropriate spelling, and like they're just talking about how important it is to like build those relationships with the community. But anyways, before I go into a tangent about that, away from classification, it's really neat. And one of the things they were talking about is there's a lot of things going on that you might not think are going on, but they pretty much were saying, like all of our guests were saying, if there's a topic, there's like, you just know there's like a project going on where like Indigenous librarians are working at it. And it's really, really been cool to see during that class. But I guess I have another question for you. So you said that one of the cool things about, you know, like classification schemes are how they're pretty transparent. But I'm wondering how your experience was when you kind of dove into, was it called the Delta collection?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that wasn't necessarily as like easy to access, was it?
No, for sure. And in fact, so the Delta collection, I'm going to try to give this a sort of, in a nutshell kind of description. The Delta collection was a collection primarily of obscenity at the Library of Congress. And that collection really grew in significance during the McCarthy era, when really there was sort of a great fear of communism and so-called sexual perversion, and a real persecution and sort of hunting of people that people regarded as being so-called sexual perverts. And at the time, so in the 50s and 60s primarily, this meant that in federal institutions, there was a great purge of homosexuals from the workforce in federal agencies. And I know that this happened in Canada too, and I know a little bit less about that, but Kate Johnson, who is a retired faculty member here at FIMS, has done a bunch of research on this. But this was a major sort of effort to sort of question and interrogate people who were so suspected of, and I'm using language of the time, of course, I'm not subscribing to these associations or even these terminologies exactly. So there were people at the Library of Congress who were questioned for being gay, for their sexual orientation and relationships and so on. And this is happening at the same time that there's increased censorship of materials going through the mail, of materials going through the Customs Department and so on, or a Customs Bureau. And so the Library of Congress became this place where materials that were seized by the Customs Bureau or by the FBI or by the Postal Service ended up. And then librarians had to determine what to do with these materials. And they really went back and forth on what the best thing to do was. Some of these were stored in this federal agents collection so that they could be consulted by other federal agents. They would collect multiple copies of them. Then they realized they had far too many copies of them. But these were things like Ulysses and Lolita. And they were also things that were, considered dangerous if they got into the wrong hands. So they could even be things like guides to family planning or something like this. If they had any kind of sort of sexually explicit material in them, or illustrations or things like this. So the Delta collection became this repository for specifically the obscene materials. There was also communist materials and things like this, but the obscene materials went into the Delta collection. It's interesting because it was managed by a person called the Keeper of the Collections, and he was also basically responsible for ensuring the security and safety of all the collections. So, you know, it was his job to make sure the Declaration of Independence was safe. And so in wartime, especially, this was a really important task. So he had all kinds of different roles that were really about making sure that the library materials were secure. And among his tasks was the Delta collection, and he did not enjoy this part of his job. And so the archive about the Delta collection is really interesting. So the collection itself was for the most part hidden away. There wasn't the public didn't have access to the catalog. It wasn't completely off limits. So if you knew about it and you knew what you wanted, you could go and you could consult the librarian, and they would be able to find you what you needed. But it was very much like sort of an appointment based, or like a specific, you had to consult with their librarian.
So how would you have known about it back then? Would it have been hard to find out about?
I actually don't know how you would have known about it. I don't know how that was. So it was sort of secret, like it was sort of, but it was consulted by members of Congress. There were times when people consulted the collection to get sort of supporting information in a law case or something like this. And so it was effectively a relatively secret collection. These were materials that they didn't want in the hands of the public. And so the way that I see this is that there was a way in which it was meant to protect the materials from being destroyed, because some of them were actually quite valuable. They might have had really beautiful plates or something like this. So there was a way in which the materials themselves were protected from users, and then also users, like the public, was protected from these dangerous materials. Mm-hmm. And I also think that there's a way in which the library itself was sort of protecting itself. It didn't want to be known for having these kinds of materials. So they kept them sort of secret. Mm-hmm. It's super interesting. And then a lot of materials were destroyed in this process of seizing them from customs and so on. And then they would decide, the librarians would have to decide what to keep and what to destroy, and how they'd be destroyed.
That's, oh my gosh, like that's just so interesting. So when things would be destroyed, I don't know, maybe this is just like a question that a listener might be asking or wondering, like including myself, did they ever burn the books?
Yeah, so they were incinerated. They were placed in burn bags. That's what they were called, and incinerated. Wow. Mm-hmm. I know. Wow. It doesn't make any sense.
That's wild.
I love that.
Yeah. And so that history is interesting. It was really interesting to do that history because I went looking for materials about sexual perversion and sort of the history of how things got categorized under this heading, basically. And I went to the Library of Congress and went to their rare books to see these older books that got classified as such. And I kind of just wanted to see, you know, what they imagined books about perversion were, you know, going back to around 1900 to the present. And when I was there, I had some really interesting conversations. And in fact, ahead of my visit, the archivist in the manuscripts division said, you might be interested in this collection of papers, which was the papers of the Keeper of the Collections. And indeed, it seems that nobody's really done research on this. And so I went around and I was like, do you know anything about this? Do you know anything? I was asking everybody I could about this at the Library of Congress, people that, you know, are known researchers. And nobody'd really done anything about this. And the collection wasn't listed in, you know, any kinds of, it wasn't featured in list of collections or things like this. So there really wasn't a people didn't really know much about it at all. They might have known that it existed, but they didn't know what it was about or how it was managed or what it contained. So yeah, it was really an interesting thing to sort of unearth that, and so the archives are really interesting because the keeper of the collection kept a diary. So there's really interesting diary entries, and then there's a lot of memoranda floating around, and everybody sort of not wanting to take responsibility for this, and not wanting to claim. Nobody wanted to really claim that they knew what to do with these materials either. Really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like a dark hidden history. It's really, really cool that you did that. So I'm wondering, like, when you were kind of looking at what things were like classified as perverse, like what did that look like? Maybe specifically in the context of like queerness. Like, I'm guessing it was kind of like pathologized.
Yeah, so originally, so I was looking at subject heading. So back to that whole subject heading versus shelf classification. I was looking at the things that were classified as being about sexual perversion. And the way that I entered into that the reason I got into that was because I was looking as a graduate student, trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my dissertation. I was looking at the UW-Madison catalog, and I was looking for materials on bisexuality and history, mainly. That's what I was thinking I wanted to do. And I found this record for this book written by Wilhelm Steckel, who was a colleague of Freud's. And he had a book called, in translation, it was, bisexuality, the homosexual neurosis or something like this. This is how he titled it, right? This is like in the, this
oh
is
dear.
Yes, but this is how.
Oh dear.
But the worst part about it, like, so that is what it is. It's what he called it, or that's how it was translated. But the Library of Congress record, that was in the Madison catalog, the Library of Congress subject headings, I should say, said neuroses and paraphilias. And paraphilias was a word that I didn't know. And so I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. This, what is that? And so I clicked on paraphilias, and I saw that the library had hundreds of things that were cataloged using this term. And I was very confused. I was like, well, this must be a relic. Maybe something didn't get updated. What's going on here? And then so I dug and dug and dug. And then I realized that the Library of Congress actually authorized this as a subject heading in 2007. And so I was so confused.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was meant to replace sexual deviations, which had been authorized in the 1970s. And sexual deviations had replaced sexual perversions. So it's sort of kind of following, other discourses in psychiatric discipline. But I found it really alarming and confusing in terms of access. If libraries, tend to privilege access above all else, and that is not always necessarily the, speaking of indigeneity, access and more is not always the best, but certainly paraphilias is not something that I think promotes access, because nobody knows what that means. Exactly. Not lay people, right?
Yeah, and for the listener, could you describe paraphilia?
Yeah, I mean, it's a psychiatric term. It's basically used in the psychiatric community. It's in the diagnostic manual. And it's the term that's used for what we might call sexual deviations or perversions or so on. And that's super complicated, but it is that kind of, it's a medicalized term. And so what falls under that, and so the reason that this book by Wilhelm Steckel had this heading attached was because when it was originally cataloged back in the day, like maybe in the 1930s, it was given the heading sexual perversion. And then because of updating technologies, when that heading was updated, it became sexual deviations, and then sexual perversion. So it was just sort of done in a sort of global update process. And so it just still retains that terminology, but now in it's a very kind of anachronistic, because it wasn't term that was in common usage. It's not in common usage now either, but it wasn't really a term then. So I was just kind of like, how does this all work? That's how I came to that. I just wanted to figure out, like, what does this mean to have all these materials? And so what that means is that, so homosexuality as a heading didn't become a Library of Congress heading until the 1940s. So everything before that, if it was about what we would call queerness now, it would have fallen under that sexual perversion heading, because there just wasn't another way to describe it.
Right.
And even today, we don't have a heading for queer. We have queer theory, but we don't have a heading for queer. There aren't really great headings for these identity categories.
I could imagine so.
Yeah, and so and headings for like gay men, I think, were authorized like in the late 80s. So
wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is
we're all just like, oh,
wild. Yeah.
We're all so disappointed.
So disappointed.
It's wild.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's partly because it's a bureaucracy, but it's also, I mean, it's largely the work of people like Sandy Berman and Barbara Giddings and these people who petitioned the Library of Congress to say, we need better headings. We need better, like, these are outdated.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And you wrote a book about this. Could you tell our listeners what your book's called and how they can find it?
The book is called Cruising the Library, Perversities in the Organization of Knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're all going to go read that.
Yes.
1,000,000%. Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I wanted to ask though, because I don't know. So I was wondering about, because I was thinking when we were talking about subject headings, how a lot of, I guess, like mainstream readers have almost come up with their own concept of subject headings under the whole like tag format, which I know we use a lot on Goodreads. And I also thought it was important to mention, like, it's a nice little kind of overlap, and also with our catalog system that we have at our library, the subject headings are also known as like tags or keywords. So you can type in that as like a keyword search and sort of pop it up. But I think it's nice that the general public has kind of like taken that responsibility and been like, listen, you're not doing it right. We're gonna add our own spin onto it. So like, what's your take on, you know, Goodreads tags, and essentially like if that could be amalgamated into like a professional library setting at some point?
Yeah, and I think in some places they are. Library Thing is the other sort of catalog your own books site. I know that libraries do import those into their catalogs. So, and the functionality varies from library to library and system to system. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm a big fan of that. I mean, it's not a perfect system either, but I do like the idea of people being able to define what these things are about for themselves, and to have a capacity to, you know, call things what they would call them. So yeah, I think that's great. And it's interesting because I think it tends to be the case that most of the people who are tagging things tend to be librarians.
You caught us.
We can't turn it off.
No,
it just keeps going.
It's ingrained.
I know for me personally, if I'm looking for something on Goodreads and like maybe the description or like the summary of the book isn't super clear, I immediately go over to the tags and I'm like, okay, what do other people think this is about?
Yeah.
This isn't telling me enough. And it's helpful. It definitely is.
Helpful.
Well, and the best thing about those tags too is what I really like is, so to circle back to the annoying book that got classified as romance, but we all know wasn't a romance novel, you can see the number of times people have tagged it as something too. So you can see one gets like out tagged almost and another. So like in the instance of that book, like fantasy would have like 10,000, whereas romance will only have like, you know, 6,500 kind of thing. So you can kind of see what the majority is deciding that it's about too, and essentially like make your case that way, which I kind of like too, because it's kind of like, okay, well, you know, phone a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that collective energy. That's like, okay, I've been trying to convert everyone to the story graph from Goodreads because Goodreads is owned by Amazon. But anyways, okay, so the story graph is so cool because like pretty much like from how I have like understood the system, the platform to work, is that like every time you input, like you review a book or whatever, like you are the ones contributing to those tags. So then after, like when you go look for a books, like there's no like it's this or this. It's just like the most popular tags for like the moods. I just think that's so much better. And then it's like it's more about the reader than about like the classifier, especially for fiction.
I love that. So you're
That's
saying like
cool.
it tags it on moods. Like if I just want like, does it tag it on tropes? Can we talk about that for a second?
Oh my
I saw a
gosh.
post that was like, if they had, sorry, you should know we all are just like huge romance novel fans and we're like suckers for good tropes.
Yeah.
There was like a enemies to lovers trope or like, you know, I just shop in that section.
That would be
That
so
sounds
cool
so
though.
much cooler to like be able to look based on the trope that's being used in the book, because we talk about this a lot, like we are all very much so involved in the romance world. We read a lot of romance, so there's just so many. Like what if I do just want enemies to lovers or like a convenient marriage, like, you know, marriage of convenience, like that's such a cool way of cataloging.
Convenience.
Oh,
The
those are the
best.
best.
Okay. That's super interesting. Yeah.
There's just I think when we talk about it, because we're huge nerds and we talk about this outside of the podcast as well, just in general. Just so much that we could do with classification systems outside of like governing bodies, and the idea of the public kind of like taking back that idea or what they want or, you know, what they need or what they're looking for. We kind of like that idea of it coming from us and not from them.
Yes. And that notion of like it being sort of a social cataloging, that means you're in conversation with each other and you're,
and I think it appeals more to the general population as well, to be honest. Like, you've got people, especially when we branch out from books and we start talking about like DVDs and music and like all of that, all of those different things that we have at the library available to our patrons as well. Something that's incredibly user friendly, because, you know, Dewey is fine on paper, but our patrons look at that and they go, I can't do that.
Yeah, it's not very accessible. So this, I don't know, just like imagining this is really cool to think about, you know.
Yeah. I always thought it would be fascinating to like take the picture book section and divide it not by like alphabetical author names, but like books about dogs and books about, I don't know, school and books about moving like vehicles and something like that. Because I mean, little kids aren't gonna be like, oh yes, I think today I'd like a book by this author. It's not as, I mean, you know, they have usually an adult with them, but
so it's user friendly for what they're looking for. But if a child independently can find what they're looking for in our stacks, it's a lot more, it's better for them, right? Because they're also learning. They're learning how to use the library in a different way to look for symbols and visuals, not just for the last name of the author. Because when a child goes in, they're not looking for, I'm going to read Robert Munch today. They're like, I want to read a book about a big cookie.
Tired of him.
Sorry. Like, not another one of his. But
and even for staff too, because like when I'm looking in the stacks and whatever, it's going to be like a bike month story time. It's so hard. Like sometimes I found myself just pulling like every single cover, because like you go through the system and like we know that once kids put a book back in the shelf, there's no finding it ever again. So it would be great for us. Like, I'm saying this in a selfish way. Like, I don't know. I'd be very curious to see what that looked like, Kylie.
I feel like, Kylie, you immediately thought of this because you're doing bundles and you're tired of searching.
Yeah, we do a lot of book bundles, and there's a lot of like, I'd like a book about things that move.
Things that go.
Where do I find those?
Dinosaurs.
Just reading the title of every book on the shelf until I find something that's like truck.
Well, and kids classification is even harder too. And I know, because like, so I work in the children's department at the main branch of the library, and I primarily do children's programming. And there's a lot of books recently that I've noticed that are classified as nonfiction, which I think we all know don't circulate as well as fiction do, just for various different reasons, but that are written like fiction. So for instance, there's this amazing book about Stonewall and, you know, the protests that happened, and, you know, it being this huge like icon in the LGBTQ community, and it's classified as nonfiction, but the book is written like a story. So I feel like there are a lot of stories now that kind of overlap, where they're teaching children about like historical things, but it's written and illustrated very much like a children's book, but it's not going to circulate because it's over, you know, in a different section. So, and those are hard too. And I know like the poetry section is like a whole other mess, but it's especially with children's fiction, it's hard. I feel like that's the biggest one to tackle.
Yeah.
I had some picture book, well, actually not picture books, it was kids nonfiction come in that I thought were picture books, and I went and put them on the picture book cart, and then when I was putting them away, like, oh, these aren't picture books. I like didn't even look at the label because I just saw the cover and was like, oh yeah, picture book. And yeah, it was fully going into the nonfiction section. So yeah, there are a lot of those coming in. I guess it's perhaps a new trend that there's like a lot of,
which is great. I mean, like, you know, for the kids to be able to read something, like there's a really great book again, like on Harvey Milk and like his story, but told as a children's story, but also it's classified as nonfiction because it's technically, and that's the huge thing I think in classification is technicalities. Because it is technically nonfiction, but you know, I think you're alienating a huge portion of the population by classifying it that way, especially in a public library. So
I think so.
Interesting.
It is interesting considering that we have a picture book section. Like it's not necessarily called fiction, it's called picture books.
Yeah.
So realistically speaking, like if you're going to have picture books, those should be in the picture book section, but because they're nonfiction, they end up over there. But there are so many great books. Like look at Shark Lady. Lady, when I first read that, I was like, this is a picture book.
Shark Lady. It's so
and then
good.
You're like, oh no, this is a real lady, and it's shelved in nonfiction, but it reads just like a picture book. And that's obviously a choice that the library system has made, not to have, you know, in large print, for instance, large print, you have all of large print, but then you also have large print nonfiction. Yeah, it'd be interesting to just maybe move the picture books from nonfiction into picture books nonfiction, right? Because then we can just take everything that's picture book and it's still nonfiction, but it's cataloged in the picture book section. So that's actually
interesting.
That's very interesting.
That's a good idea.
That's a project for you, Shelby.
Well, you know, Shelby, if you want to work on that, call me, because I've actually I talked to my boss about that, because so we've talked about this on the podcast before. We're all in charge of something called weeding, which is a very fancy word for taking books off the shelves that are dirty or outdated and we don't need them anymore, to make room for new ones. So when I was weeding the 811s, the poetry, there's so much. So you've got your, you know, your alligator pies that everybody knows, but, you know, again, they don't move because they're in a section that doesn't get browsed. So I'd actually brought it up with my boss. I was like, this would be a really easy just switch over. We'll just change it to a JP, which is the way that we classify our picture books, with the last name of the author, and just pop it, you know, in the picture book section. Like, it's very simple. So we actually talked about, you know, at one point doing that. And I think there are a lot of books, you know, like Shark Lady, I can have like a special little disclaimer, like, hey, based on a true story or something in the catalog, but put it somewhere where the kids are going to find it.
I love this idea. Can we please do this? Because this is so much easier and more accessible, because all of these stories that are so easy to teach your kids, if they're already written in that language, like they should be accessible and knowledgeable. And even us, the librarians who see the books come in, you know, especially at the branches, we deal with circulation. And right now, because we don't have pages, we're also, you know, putting the books away. Like right now, we're very physical with the material, but on a typical basis, we don't really get to see as much as we'd like to. Like right now, we get to like sit there and peruse through the books when they come in, but usually you're running at such a high speed that you don't get to. So that's the one positive thing about our pandemic and our lockdown, is that we get to spend the time with the material and try and really figure out a way to make it more accessible. And I love this idea so much.
Send me an email. You can jump on board.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, I think it just, so what you're doing, what's happening here is like, we're sort of like realizing like we're all trained into doing this, like to running a library and organizing it a particular way because that's the way it's always been done. And I think it's really hard for people to sort of even think to question that. Like, we just do this because this is how we do it. And then we train more and more people in it, and we go to library school and this is how it's done. And like, it's just that idea is reinforced and reinforced. And then all it takes is saying like, wait, does it have to be?
Yeah.
Yeah, why?
So this conversation has totally turned, like now your listeners are getting sort of an insight. It's like a staff meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Welcome to our behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It works
Yeah.
perfectly for this episode, honestly. Because this episode is really a behind the scenes episode where we kind of get to talk with our listeners about what goes on in the library from people who work it, who are from a generation that is coming into the library system. We're seeing a huge turnover, especially in our library system, where a lot of things are changing, and it's because new people are coming into the system and finally asking why. Like, why do we keep doing this? Do we need to keep doing this? Is there a better way to do it? And this library system has been in my life since the minute I was born. Like, you can see that my library card was created like in 1996, and to see it to change so much, even within the last like year, like literally a year ago in March, we were locked down, and the amount that we have been able to do to be able to sit down and really like interact with our material and change the way we think about it. It's been so amazing to be able to get to do that. And it's so amazing to watch like something like this, where this idea was just kind of like born in this speech of us just kind of talking. Like, this is what we do. And we love to talk about it, and we'll always talk about it, even if we're not working.
It's true. We have a group chat. It's fine.
We do.
I love it too. I could talk about it all the time too.
Yeah, but and what Shelby built on too is that not only are we coming from sort of like the turnover, but we're also coming from different backgrounds. So both Ashlyn and Shelby are doing their Masters of Library Science, but like I did my library tech. So I did my diploma. So it's a nice comparison of, you know, what you learn at the college level versus what you're learning at the university level. We all have like different undergrads under our belts as well, which brings different ideas forward. And not only that, is like we have people above us that are really open to change too. So I know like my boss is incredible. Like I can go to her and be like, hey, we should move poetry. And she's like, yeah, I'd love to hear about it. So that's nice too, that we're given that freedom to sort of ask questions and not just sort of be shot down too, at the very least. So there's that.
Yeah, no, that makes all the difference to be able to have that. And I mean, and it's so great that you're having these conversations very openly and sort of really hoping that the public gives you feedback. And that, you know, like ideally you would actually be saying, well, what do you all want? Like, wouldn't it be amazing to just have these books spread out and see what the kids do, or ask them to sort them?
Yeah.
It'd be so.
That would be actually really amazing to watch. To just like get some kids in to be like, where do you think they should go? That's amazing.
We should do a program when the library reopens. Of just like,
I'm bringing that to the RA team.
You have to. No, that's so cool. I love that. No, that's amazing. This has been like such a good conversation. I don't want to keep you on forever, Melissa, because we honestly sometimes we do talk for hours, pass around what we're currently reading or what we're reading next.
Okay.
All right. Do you want to go?
What are you reading, Melissa?
I'm reading a lot of things at the moment. June Bat by John Elizabeth Stintsey. It's a book of poetry, and I've just started it, but it's beautiful, and it's by this non-binary writer who is Canadian. And I just read their Vanishing Monuments, which is a novel which I thought was really, really beautiful, partly because it's really talking about this non-binary person who had left home years ago, and then comes back when their mother has very advanced dementia, and it's really complicated, this relationship. And this person goes back to their house in Winnipeg, their childhood home, and it's just full of really interesting references to memory and it's so, it's kind of mind bendy. And I think it's really kind of getting at sort of there's a very queer timelessness, strangeness to the narration that is, it's intentional because it's playing with memory and loss and all these really big themes in a way that's quite compelling, I find. So I just started the volume of poetry, but the description is that they were written when the person was in a state of sort of despair and isolation. And so they're working through some really big things. So it's beautiful and Canadian and queer. So goes with it. I would recommend both of those.
That
So
sounds
just
so
recorded
amazing.
our queer lit episode the last one we just did was our queer lit episode, and that would have been so cool to like have read that. That sounds so cool. I'll definitely put it on our list.
Cool.
Yeah,
it is cool. And it's interesting, and it's for us who are sort of I consider libraries and archives, like we're doing memory work in a certain way. So these, I think, I really enjoy novels in particular that play with memory, because there's, to me, the novel Vanishing Monuments is a book about archives in a certain way. Yeah. There's and toward the end, there's an explicit, like there is a visit to an archive, but I feel like the entire thing is kind of about that. So it's really interesting.
Sounds so good. Cool.
Yeah.
Just add it to the never-ending list.
Yeah.
For real.
Okay, Erin, what did you read, or what are you reading next?
Oh, well, I've been on a bit of a reading bender, I should specify. Do you guys ever just get in that mood where you just read a book a day because you can't help yourself?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at. But the next on my list, hopefully, Shelby and Kylie, you're going to be really happy with this, is Six of Crows.
What?
I gave grab it. Yes, I gave it a chance a few years ago and I couldn't get into it, but I think I'm in the right headspace for it now. From what I understand and from what I remember from the first like 75 pages, it's just sort of like Ocean's 11 meets fantasy a little bit.
Yes.
With this whole concept of like a found family and just like super cool, rockin' characters. So I'm gonna try it again, and because the TV show is coming out in April, and I have to read it.
Have to read it.
Yeah.
So,
I'm
ladies,
so proud.
It's here.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I'll hold mine up next.
I was gonna say we should have coordinated.
I'm also next going to be reading Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Yeah, it's basically Ocean's 11 meets fantasy. It's a heist. It's a bunch of teenagers who have been tasked with breaking into like this impenetrable enemy fortress for like $1 million of their version of dollars. And everyone's basically, oh, you can't do it. And they're like, nah, we probably can. And they're a feisty group, and it's a really good group of characters. They're amazing. Found family, great trope.
Yes, I do love a found family.
I'll go next because I have Six of Crows, but it's not one that I'm currently reading. I did just start this one. I'm reading Fable by Adrienne Young.
Oh, I've heard such good things.
I've heard so many good things. Every time I'm on Instagram looking at the book reels, it always pops up. I've only gotten to like chapter 2 or 3, but it has this amazing ability to just kind of suck you into the story. And I think it has to do with pirates, honestly. Like so far, okay, because I
love a ship.
I didn't read what the book was about because I was like, you know what? I just want to be surprised. Do you ever just want to be really surprised by the book you're reading?
Wow.
Always.
So I have no idea what the book truly is about, but it opens with her fully sprinting down a hill towards the water, and the ship is taking off, and she like jumps from something onto the ship, and then spends the day diving, collecting this gemstone that almost like sings to her. So I'm not really sure if something's going to happen there, but I immediately was just pulled into the story, and her talking about taking breaths. Like she does this whole like paragraph on how she prepares her lungs to deep dive into the ocean. And just because it's fun to do what they're doing in books, I was sitting there like trying to breathe like her. It really calmed me down too. We also just finished a book from a series that Erin, Kylie, and I all read,
Yeah.
called A Court of Silver Flames, which we won't get into, but she also does a lot of breathing exercises to kind of calm her mind. But
Full on
so far,
mindfulness.
yes, 100% mindfulness. And
I was like, I did the seminar.
I really love it so far. I love the imagery of the water, her swimming in it. I absolutely adore diving in water, and it's kind of different. I've been reading a lot of fae fantasies. So if it's a pirate one, I am here for a pirate story. Love a good pirate story.
Spoiler alert, but I think I saw, because I've been seeing it all over my like bookstagram.
Bookstagram.
I feel like it might be a mermaid book too.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
I'm obsessed with mermaids.
I know. I could be wrong though. So I apologize in advance if I got you excited. But I feel like I heard something about mermaids.
I will actually, because she kind of looks like Ariel, like with the red hair.
With the water.
Okay. The water.
We'll see. You'll have to let me know.
Okay, now I have to read it. I have so much work to do, Erin. Okay,
I'm
sorry.
Sorry.
It's cracked it.
We get very excited about books. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Very. Yeah.
Don't be sorry.
Ashlyn, what are you reading?
Okay, I am currently reading Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. Oh my gosh, yeah. So Kate, one of our other co-hosts who isn't here today, she recommended it to me. I'm like halfway through. It's really, really good. It's so interesting. It kind of goes into like feminism and how kind of mainstream feminism intersects with like queer feminisms and like feminists of color and just like intersectionality. But it's wild because the main character, her name's Juliet, and she lives in she spent her whole life like in the Bronx, and she's Puerto Rican, and she moves to Portland, Oregon, which is like Twilight. Super.
Twilight?
What do you mean? That's Forks, Washington.
Yeah, they go to Portland.
They do? Stop.
Dress shopping.
You're right. Yeah, so they go to Portland. And like Portland is like a super like hippie place, but like kind of like saturated in like whiteness and white feminism. So it's really, really like interesting to read this book and like hear her navigate, and like she idolizes like this like one author who's like white feminist in both in both like meanings of the term. It's wild. Also, Roxane Gay like reviewed it very strongly, and you know, if Roxane Gay says something is good, it's going to be fantastic. So yeah, now I need to like finish this, but yeah, that's what's next for me.
So thank you again to Melissa. Thank you so much for hanging out and talking classification with us. Listeners, as usual, if you have any questions, send us a message, and you know, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. And don't forget our library bundles. I know Kylie and I mentioned that earlier. So if you want a bundle of books for adults or kids, you can find that on our website. And we also do DiscoverReads. So if you just want a librarian to put together a personalized list of things you should read, you can reach out to us for one of those as well. And we will see you all in a couple of weeks. Bye.
All right, bye.